Skiing, snowboarding, toboggan, getting trapped in an avalanche. Winter sports can be so much fun. That is, unless you are a character on my computer in Sims 4. My sim, Schmablo Picasso, was currently in a bit of an awkward situation. Having once been a world-famous artist, Schmablo's dreams were shattered when all of his paintings were stolen by his then-girlfriend, Bella Goth. As it so happened, Bella was part of an organisation known as the Mount Komorebi Mafia, a discovery Schmablo made upon joining his own criminal gang with the help of local troublemakers Robbie Rotten, Fagin and Dick Dastardly. In a weird twist of fate, however, this mafia also owned majority stakes in the Sims 4 Winter Olympics. The grand prize for this prestigious competition? You guessed it, Schmablo's paintings. So here he was, freezing his left testicle off outside the chalets of Mount Komorebi, wondering how on earth he was ever going to win a skiing and snowboarding competition, having never done either activity in his life, especially when the opposition this year was incredibly tough. There was Crash Helmet Kevin, having accidentally frozen the top of his head whilst bending down to get a pizza out of his freezer. Kevin's skull was so hard he could survive the most dangerous of falls, simply by landing on his dome. Then there was Sharon Snowshoe. Heartthrob of the snowboarding scene, Sharon was admired the world over for her giant ears, which are not only very cool and very sexy, but give her impeccable balance on her trusty snowboard. Furthermore, she hails from a rich dynasty of snowshoe makers. If one thing's for sure, her boots will be staying firmly on her feet. And finally there was Mrs. Frosty, an expert freestyle snowboarder whose identity remains a mystery. That mascot costume never comes off, and rumour has it whoever is under the suit has invented special methods to ensure they haven't yet once been to the toilet. Phew, Schmablo really didn't stand much of a chance, but he was going to get his paintings back if it cost him an arm and a leg, and probably a couple of broken bones as well. So he put on his tuxedo, which was the closest thing he owned to a ski jacket, and turned up at the competition HQ. He would be staying with the other competitors in a luxury modern Japanese tatami apartment. The location was much more peaceful than Schmablo had expected, and he engaged himself in a spot of pre-tournament topiary whilst chatting away with Mrs. Frosty, but oh, hang on. Why is she here? Bella Goth had walked into the room. Schmablo's topiary immediately rotted. Although he wasn't best pleased to see the woman who had stolen his most prized possessions, Bella did at least arrive with good intentions. She claimed to have left behind her criminal ways, and was instead here to offer Schmablo some insider advice. It dawned on Schmablo that having never stepped foot in one singular ski, he was probably going to need all the advice he could get. So reluctantly he accepted, and Bella informed him of the situation. The competition was to be hosted at Mount Komorebi Ski Resort, and overseen by a mysterious gentleman known as the Judge. The Judge was a member of the mafia Bella was once a part of, and this is who Schmablo would have to impress. It was difficult to tell whether the Judge's face was deliberately void of expression, or whether he was just so cold it had frozen into place. But before Schmablo could decide, the first round of the Sims 4 Winter Olympics was about to begin. They would start at the very bottom of the resort, on what was known as the baby slope. This was a bit embarrassing, but for Schmablo it might be a lucky break, as it would give him the opportunity to learn the basics. He made his way to the top of the run, clipped into his skis, and feeling confident he could handle a slope made for babies, he went for it. Oh god, whoa Nelly, this was way harder than I anticipated. Schmablo felt like Bambi from that movie, Bambi. And when he reached the bottom, instead of coming to a graceful halt, he fell flat on his arse. The Judge was not impressed. Sharon Snowshoe wandered across full of smugness. She suggested skiing better, then telling him to watch this, which, even if she was trying to be helpful, would do Schmablo no good, as Sharon was a snowboarder. She headed to the top of the baby slope, and then proceeded to slalom down it in style, swaying side to side until she too ended up on her rear end. Haha, thought Schmablo, these twerps were just as bad as him. Perhaps he had a chance. Crash Helmet Kevin was next, and after warming up by doing a couple of press-ups, he showed them all just how it was done. gliding down the hill with ease and shifting his skis expertly for a controlled finish. He was certainly the current favourite, or he would have been had everyone not been distracted by Bella Goff, who had lost control of her sledge and went crashing over several huge jumps, impressing the judge so much that he forgot she wasn't even competing. And this gave Mrs. Frosty an idea. The mysterious mascot took her snowboard and began to ride down the sledge run, shooting up the first ramp and pulling off an exciting bunny hop. At the end of the first round, the only certain thing was Schmablo was dead last. His tuxedo was filthy, and he went to bed battered and bruised, wondering how he would even conceive of making a comeback. The next morning didn't start much better, as the contestants were woken up early by the sound of the judge kicking the bin over. I guess in the mafia this is what they call an alarm clock. The baby slope might have been hard, but today's challenge would be even more difficult, as each competitor was forced to take on the blue run. Full of self-importance, despite her poor form yesterday, Sharon Snowshoe was first to ride the cable car to the mountain's peak. And this time she was determined to show just why they called her Dumbo. Hurtling down the hill at breakneck pace, as she went soaring over each jump, you'd be forgiven for thinking she could fly. With those big ears rippling in the wind, it was a very impressive run. As a matter of pride, Crash Helmet Kevin couldn't let anyone be seen to be faster than him. So he took to the stage next, hoisting on his skis and launching onto the piste with reckless abandon. In fact, Kevin's head was so round and had so little friction that he may have overcooked it, and his jumps nearly sent him out of control. Blimey, these two would be very tough acts to follow. And of course, Schmablo was next. As he reached the top, his knees were trembling. Okay Schmablo, just take this run as carefully as possible. He didn't need to do fancy jumps. If he could just make it to the bottom in a dignified way, that would be enough. Unfortunately, Schmablo didn't know how to turn properly yet, and the jumps were dead ahead. Oh god! Crunch! His knees buckled as he hit the floor, but he didn't fall. The second jump came, and Schmablo turned his feet inwards to form a triangle. As an artist, Schmablo knew that triangles were the strongest shape, and he came to a graceful, if not angular stop at the bottom of the hill. He turned around, hoping to see a look of admiration on the judge's face, but the judge was currently distracted by a bunch of large monkey statues he had found, and by the time he returned, Mrs. Frosty was stunting all over the blue run, even managing to film a trick shot montage on the way down. Thankfully, her style wouldn't last, as she decked it at the finish, in such a spectacular fashion in fact, that her trick montage was sent into You've Been Framed, and she received a £250 reward in the post. Surely the judge would have to mark her down for that, but hang on, now he was off enjoying a quick sledge. This wasn't fair. Schmablo should have known. This competition was rigged from the very beginning. Classic mafia business. The idea they would just give him his paintings back if he did a bit of skiing was too good to be true. Perhaps his paintings weren't even up for grabs in the first place. Perhaps Bella Goff was still having him on. Why did he fall for her every single time? Hook, line and sinker. Schmablo felt so gullible. But it might not be Bella he had to worry about most, as the next day, her husband, Mortimer, paid the contestants a visit. He introduced himself as the chairman of the Winter Sports Committee, but Schmablo knew this was a front, and after greeting the other guests, he fixed Schmablo with a menacing stare. "I hope you're not thinking of backing out now," he said under his breath in a very convincing mafia accent. "My clients are expecting a good show tomorrow." Schmablo gulped. So that's what this was. He had been set up. The mafia were making an example out of him. Back out now and he'd be in terrible danger, but continue and he would be a laughingstock. Either way, he couldn't win. The last day of the competition rolled round, and each competitor prepared themselves for a grand finale. Today's challenge would be an exciting double whammy, as each of them would take on the infamous red and black runs in quick succession. The judge began a pre-showcase briefing, but just as he did, Mrs. Frosty ran off. Where was she going? What? Hold up, I could have sworn there was two of her there for a moment. Weird. As Mrs. Frosty was absent, it was up to one of the others to kick things off, and Crash Helmet Kevin boldly volunteered. This was a man with a head so solid he feared nothing, and still, even he was a bit nervous as he reached the top of the red run. With that, he began the first of his two descents. The red run was full of many obstacles, but Kevin zoomed past them with his usual burst of speed, then performing a majestic 360, for which he crossed his skis into a big X, sending the crowd into a burst of oohs and ahs. Then it was back up the chairlift for the treacherous black run. This was really no place to be skiing, thought Schmablo. It was no more than a series of sheer cliff faces. And yet, despite this, Kevin manoeuvred the course with wonderful dexterity. All was near perfect until, on the final straight, he reached terminal velocity, slipped over, and was sent skidding into a tumbling spin. Although I have to say, he styled it out pretty well. The fact remained, Kevin had messed up, and the door was now open for someone else to steal the show. Sharon Snowshoe felt it was her time to shine. She took the red run in her stride, dropping a backside 360 with an immaculate landing. However, much the same as Kevin, she had built up too much speed and ended up in a heap at the bottom of the hill. If she wanted to be in with any shout for first then, her black run would have to be extra spectacular. And it was. Sharon risked it all by doing an insane double backflip, then making it into a quadruple backflip off the next pile of rocks. Such was her heritage that even with this crazy amount of spinning, her shoes stayed firmly on her feet. Sadly, the rest of her body did not, as she decked it for what felt like the 1000th time. Sharon too was now also pretty much out of the running. Schmablo couldn't believe his luck. Against all the odds, all the attempted corruption and tournament fixing, he might have a chance of winning this thing after all. All he had to do was not fall over. Surely he could manage just 2 runs that weren't a complete disaster. Well, kind of. The red run started well. Schmablo may have landed his jumps with quite a wide berth, but land them he did, and he made it to the bottom without any problems. All of a sudden, something in Schmablo had awoken. He had cracked skiing, and he was performing at the peak of his powers. On the black run, Schmablo dived into a fantastic front flip, then bending his knees low and swerving side to side across the powder. When he reached the finish for the final time, he was sure he had this in the bag. But then Mrs. Frosty returned from her absence, and, well, she wiped the floor with everyone. I mean, come on, that's just not fair. I don't even know what to call that. And what the hell is that? Jesus, Mrs. Frosty, there's children watching this, tone it down. As the big friendly mascot drifted into finish, Schmablo's heart dropped. He knew it was over. His paintings were going to be given to a stupid giant green... 2 stupid giant green... Hang on, there was 3 of them now. No, wait, 4! What was going on? And then, in one great unmasking, it all became clear. It was Robbie Rotten, and Fagin, and Dick Dastardly, and Megumi. He was so confused. Bella arrived, feeling triumphant, and explained the whole thing. She and Schmablo's old gang had hatched a plan to win back his paintings at all costs. It just so happened that each of them was a master at one of the 4 grades of ski slope, so of course they had to enter. But the question remained, how could they 100% make sure they would claim first prize? Well, they'd enter as a group, each taking shifts, disguising themselves under the ingenious invention of Mrs. Frosty. But as Bella waffled on about her incredible plan, Schmablo began to realise he was starting to get really rather cold. He was only wearing a tuxedo after all, and his normal outfit, jeans and a t-shirt, was even worse. He was turning blue. Icicles were growing on his mustache, and before he knew it, he had frozen to death. Oh crumbs, what a way to go. Still, at least he could haunt his own paintings now.